Well, 2016 was supposed to be the year of VR, and even though things did happen and change, and we had a lot more titles to enjoy, including new hardware from Sony themselves, the PSVR, it didn't really make the kind of splash that I think many thought it would. Now, some of this is down to the fact that, again, there's still not any really groundbreaking titles available on the format. Now, this is not to say that there isn't great games to play and great demos to play. I do actually have an upcoming in-depth analysis of the hardware and my review of the PSVR, which should be up shortly, and the link will be in the video, and that will go into far more detail. But here I'm really covering one of the questions that many people asked, which is, what is the performance like on the PSVR, and does it really hold on to that 60 FPS, 90 FPS, or even 120 FPS that it outputs to the OLED display? Now, a little bit of explanation here. Most titles will run at 60 Hz natively or internally in the engine itself, and then they'll be interpolated back to 120 Hz on the OLED screen. Now, some titles will run natively or internally at 90 Hz, and this will be left at 90 Hz. The OLED screen can support both 90 and 120 outputs. Now, the titles that run this 60 to 120 interpolation, time warping or reprojection or whatever else you may call it, and there are many titles for these kind of techniques now, this all works with the headset, which supports both 90 Hz and 120 Hz. So it means it can support both outputs. The titles that run at 60 though, this is done through a technique which I've covered before. This waits until the very last millisecond possible and then repolls the headset to work out where your head has moved to. It then shifts the final frame accordingly. It won't work for everything, it won't work for angles or geometry itself, or I shift the view. As a first-person user of the PSVR, and have used this in many titles, it works incredibly well. There's definitely no issues at all with that. But in terms of performance, does the game hold on to that 60 Hz, or are there any issues that are dropping below that, which may be causing some sickness, motion sickness or VR legs, which some get? I myself do get it on certain titles as well. Drive Club is a great title, but it certainly affects me quite quickly when I play it, so I can only play it for very short stints, and you get very strange feelings in the stomach and the head. But the titles affect me differently, but they do affect people as well. So performance wise, this video is literally centered on performance on PSVR outputs. Now, there's some information here. One, I had to rejig my tools to compensate for this due to the output format, the resolution, and the frame size that you get on screen. So it took a bit of tweaking, but I've now got a solution or a mode in my actual tools that allow me to support outputs on VR modes in the breakout box here. Also, the output mode given to the breakout box and thus presented on the public screen here is running around 720p on many titles. Now, whether this is actually what is being rendered to the screen in the headset may not be the case. A lot of titles also use foveated rendering, which is basically reducing the resolution in grids around the screen or a circle based on where your eye is. So think of peripheral vision. You can see an example on screen from these solutions. Now, Nvidia and AMD and many other teams have been working on these solutions along with Sony, so it's not a new thing. Many of the titles already released use this technique, and many of the boosts for PSVR on the PS4 Pro do come with basically turning this mode off due to the fact it has more GPU headroom to run it. But again, this is not going to happen. More games will push that benchmark, therefore they'll even resort back to foveated viewing. This means you get around 1280 by 720 on games like Drive Club, and again rigs here, but the outer edges of the rendering can run down to 640 by 480. Yes, we're running into old school resolutions there, but it doesn't really affect you when you're playing the game. Certainly looking at it here on the public breakout box, you can notice it more, but this is all about what you see in the headset, not the screen. So this is clever and intelligent uses. You can probably halve or maybe even more your GPU use, and more specifically your TDP use here, by doing these techniques. So it makes a lot of sense, and it doesn't really affect the enjoyment of the game or the visual quality, because again, it all comes down to your peripheral vision. You don't really notice this, whether it was turned on or off. If you look for it in the headset in the Pro mode, you can notice it ever so slightly, but again, I'll cover that more in my full review. So in terms of performance, what can we look at here? Well, there's not that much to talk about. I'm not going to drag this out much longer. You've seen so far not one single dip from multiple games here, and I've tested many games for much longer than what you're seeing on screen at the moment. There is no issues at all. Every single title and everything you've seen here is running on the standard PS4, not the Pro, and everything runs at a fully locked 60 Hz to the breakout box. Like I've already mentioned, what it actually outputs on the headset itself would be somewhere between 90 Hz and 120 Hz, dependent on the internal rendering rate. But again, there's no issues. Any motion sickness or any issues you're having with the headset are not coming from the actual performance, but it means that now that I've got my tools updated and ready to support VR modes, I can cover games, and any games that may fall into this trap that do cause hiccups and issues for players when they're playing the game, well, then I'll be able to pick them up and review them. You can watch a few more minutes of footage of PSVR. It's not the most exciting. And before anyone jumps on me, much of the footage you see here is from my wife and my children playing, not myself. One of the big benefits of VR is it gets many people who aren't even into games at all to actually give it a try, and nobody who falls into that category has come away from playing the PSVR, many of these titles here, anything other than impressed and really quite amazed at what they've seen, in addition to some wobbly legs and dodgy tummies. My two youngest children were completely unaffected by this and had no VR legs or dodgy stomachs afterwards, so maybe it really is something for the younger generation. And please check back soon for my full VR review, which the link will appear in this video and below. Also read more on my website and check out my channel for more information on this and a hell of a lot more from PC, console and PS4 Pro. Leave your thoughts and feedback below, subscribe if you enjoyed, and like if you did, and dislike if you didn't. Please follow me on Twitter. I'll see you guys on the next one.
It's unshielded.